Hey folks, we're thrilled to welcome Dr. Jared Demott, a cybersecurity veteran who started his journey at the NSA and has since made significant contributions to the world of AppSec. From teaching at renowned conferences and universities to leading successful startups focused on malware, monitoring, and pen testing, Jared's done it all. Currently, he's making waves at Microsoft, leading a team dedicated to safeguarding products and customers by transforming bug bounty reports into crucial fixes for cloud services. We'll dive deep into Jared's role at Microsoft, explore the intricacies of the bug bounty program, and journey through the ever-evolving landscape of cybersecurity. Gear up for an insightful conversation with a passionate individual who's not only making the cyber world safer, but also believes in building fun, inclusive teams with an entrepreneurial spirit. Note, Dr. Jared Demott is not officially speaking on behalf of Microsoft during this interview.
How do you create security champions? Security Journey brings together two powerful approaches to provide application security education to help developers become security champions and produce safer applications. Security Journey training content extends beyond developers to reach the entire SDLC, creating a security-first organization. Learn more about our enterprise security training at securityjourney.com.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Application Security Podcast. This is Chris Romeo. I am the CEO of Davici and a general partner at Kerr Ventures. Also joined by my good friend, Robert Hurlbut, the Sultan of Threat Modeling. I'm trying out new names, new kind of fun things. I don't know, Robert, does that sound like something you want to be?
I don't know yet, but definitely an advocate and a promoter of threat modeling for sure. So Robert Hurlbut, I'm a principal application security architect and threat modeling lead at Acquia, and really glad to be here today.
Yeah, it's. I feel like we're getting the band back together. And people that are looking at this are going, How is this the band? We've never met Dr. Jared Demott. But let me tell this quick story. In the early days of Security Journey and around the 2017-ish, I can't remember the exact year, but Robert and Jared were gracious enough to join me in what was effectively the lobby of a video studio or video production company, where we set up a little studio environment and we recorded the first ever Security Journey white belt content. And these two gentlemen were awesome on camera and provided all their expertise, and we had a lot of fun doing it. And so you guys were there at the very beginning of my startup journey, and that was a number of years ago. So Jared, let's get into your security origin story. I really do want to know this. Like, I don't know kind of how you got into security, and you have a little bit of some of the details of your path, but tell us that story if you would.
Yeah, sure. Interestingly enough, you and I both grew up in Michigan. So a little fun fact there. I grew up in a small town on the west side of the state, Reed City, if you know where that is, and was good. And my wife and I met at a college there, Ferris State University. Got married young in '98, and in 2000, was ready to enter the workforce. And, pretty much at that time in Michigan, it was like the big three for auto, and there was other manufacturing and different types. So there was some consulting and different types of healthcare and professional service, but there wasn't, certainly cyber hadn't even become a word until probably 2008 or something like that. So much later, for that whole field. And so I was about to actually accept a job at State Farm down in Bloomington, Illinois as a Unix administrator, when I got a sort of mysterious call from somebody from Baltimore saying that they wanted me to fly out and interview. And they said they were from the NSA, and I was like, okay, do you guys make tires for Ford? Or I had no idea. I had not been introduced to that world. I mean, growing up in the 80s and 90s, like 3-letter agencies, you just hadn't heard of them like you did. Yeah. That was before 9/11, it was before Snowden, it was before, and if you were, from a rural area, like that whole intelligence collection scene in DC, like I literally had never even heard of that whole scene. There weren't all the number of movies there are now and stuff on it. And so anyway, long story short, I ended up going out there, flying out there, interviewing. They hooked me up to the polygraph, and you're like, kind of rigid on the thing with the heartbeat, monitor.
Wait,
and all. It was
how crazy. Early in the interview do they hook you up to the polygraph?
Pretty much right away. They're like, you go through some interviews, and then they're like, yeah, we need to do the poly if you want to be considered. And it's like, it's like an all day thing. And before you know it, you're in the chair. you hear like, somebody else being grilled in the next room and you're like, what is going on here? Because I think sometimes they kind of like, cause with young people, it's a pretty short process. Cause like, especially back then, their hiring strategy was like, ignorant rural kids that have never traveled overseas was kind of like their target audience because they knew that you wouldn't have any like foreign connections. And now I think they've broadened their perspective on how they hire and, the whole D&I and everything is a different world we live in now than back then. But back then they had a very focused strategy on like rural kids with all A's was like basically what they were hiring for. And that was me, So anyway, it was a fun experience. I ended up hiring on there. It was just a great way to start a career. I loved it. I loved the environment. It was like this interesting mix of kind of academic, but also like you were working with military people and, I did a master's at Johns Hopkins while I was there. And you kind of just got exposed to a lot of the stuff, that became the early seeds of the cybersecurity field before it really blew up and became a big thing. And so I started going to the big conferences, like DEF CON and all that sort of stuff way back in like 2001. So been going to those for a long time. And that's kind of what really launched my career and probably how we ultimately met as far as, like you were talking about, working on some training videos and stuff, because I had a real heart from that early on. And if you went to these conferences and you watched enough talks, you were like, I feel like I could have gave that talk better. At some point, once you've been going for a few years, you'd see one that was really bad. You'd see somebody, back then, the stuff that was on stage, thank goodness some of the things in our field have changed. You'd see people drunk on stage swearing. And like, it was just like the environment wasn't the professional environment that it is now. So I think a lot of things have changed for the better in regards to conferences and stuff. And I kind of just said, I should try that too, and got into that. And that was a fun way to jump into that. So my wife and I decided to have a child. We wanted to move back to Michigan. Remote work wasn't really a thing in 2005, but I found a way to make it work somehow. And there was some other defense contracting company that was like, no, nobody works remote. Nobody, you have to be in a skiff and, do all the things that people do when you're in cleared work. And I was like, but, but back then, especially, if you had a master's degree and, 5 years experience in the top, TSSCI, they call it top secret security clearance, you could pretty much negotiate, whatever you needed. And I'm like, well, this is the deal, and they were like, all right, fine. But, you got to be in your office 8 to 5. And I'm going to call you 3 times a day to make sure that, nobody in your family's bugging you. Like the whole environment of like flexible work arrangements, it wasn't a thing back then like it is now. Like they didn't care about your personal space. And so my boss would call me like 3 times a day and like make sure I was at my desk because people didn't trust people working remote back then. It's so laughable in hindsight. Now, of course, I manage a distributed team at Microsoft, but I'm skipping ahead. So I kind of stayed in that field, decided to do a PhD at Michigan State, decided to rep the gear a little bit since my older son's he's a 3rd-year data science major at Michigan State in the Spartan marching band. So we go to all the games, and so's my senior at Rockford High School. He's in the marching band too. So we do a lot of football in the fall as far as watching the bands and all that. So I got into kind of teaching and training and did a bunch of, courses and taught at Black Hat and kind of got into that wrote a book, which is, I don't know if you can see it somewhere on my wall over there. I don't know if the video shows it or not, but, and that was great. And then enjoyed the academic scene and all of that. But I really felt like, this startups thing sounds kind of cool. Everybody in our field started getting into startups and it was kind of a hot thing to do. And so I worked for a couple startups and had a lot of fun, learned a lot, and ultimately started my own consulting company and sold that. And that was probably the first moment in my career because all the rest of the time I kind of felt like life was dragging me along. It's like, especially for me, because I was married young and had kids. So you kind of felt like got to provide, get a house, get a job, get a better job, get a master's degree, PhD. There's all these like you kind of knew where the next rung is. But after you sell a business and you've got a PhD, wrote a book, sold a business, had a family, my kids are almost grown. It was the first time in my life, I'm 45 now, I was like, I don't know where I need to go from here. Like, I'm kind of like feeling a little bit lost, actually. Not really lost, but you just kind of like, what's the next thing that you do? And one place I hadn't worked was in big tech and ended up, I did a short stint at Amazon, which I liked. I was in Prime Video and AppSec, but I was missing the management piece. I was back in an IC role. So I decided to get back into the management part and got a call from MSRC, which is the Microsoft Security Response Center. That's where I work now at Microsoft. And I really like it. It's a great organization, great mission, great group. And I can, tell you more about that if you want. But that's kind of my long, probably too long origin story.
No, it's good. It provides perspective and I learned a couple things that I can apply in my hiring process. So polygraphs for everyone. As soon as you come in to the building, it's like, hook yourself up to this thing and we're going to check and see if you're, so did you really work at this company? And then we're checking. I've got the little scribble thing and I'm standing next to it. Like, imagine that scene. Like, nobody would work for you in this day and age if there was a polygraph attached to it. But yeah, it's great to hear how you kind of moved your way through and just what you learned about remote work was excellent.
3 calls a day.
Yeah. You may have been the first person to ever work remotely. Like, that might be a distinction that you could. I'm going to look at Wikipedia and see if that's your face. If you're in there as first person to ever work remotely was Dr. Jared Demott in the western part of Michigan. So
nice,
excellent. So, Jared, tell us about what you mentioned the group you're working with, the team you're working with, but what do you do at Microsoft these days?
Yeah, so as you know, Microsoft, huge company and kind of an interesting company to work at these days. I would say, I don't know if I would have said that 10 or 15 years ago because they were, doing Office and Windows and kind of business software and stuff. But now they're a security company and they're kind of one of the forefront runners on AI and kind of it's a pretty exciting place to work for a big company. I would say, at least in my opinion, I definitely enjoy the current culture. The culture there is good too. I think our VP, Anshal, she sets a really professional vibe for our entire organization. And so we're in a pretty big and complex security org known as the Microsoft Security Response Center. We have a lot of different elements to that, not the least of which covers all of what happens at Microsoft in security. When you think about security at Microsoft, it's just huge, right? With 230,000 employees, 6 different SOCs, I don't know how many different red teams. I mean, it's just a huge company with a huge amount of different security orgs. So at least within ours, we have all that too with threat intelligence and SOC and engineering teams that make software for our portal in particular. But one of the things that we do, the team that I work on, is we do a couple of things. One of the main things is bug bounty. So you've heard of that program. Security researchers all over the world can get paid for their work. They can submit vulnerabilities through our research portal if they find different types of vulnerabilities, whether it's in Office or Windows or Azure, Cloud, AI, whatever it is. And so our team kind of splits out into different pieces depending on what the vulnerabilities are. So in my case, I'm managing the team, what we call OLS, online services. So if a researcher submits a vulnerability in, say, like Azure or something like that, or one of our different, portals or different types of software associated with the cloud online, whether it's, Dynamics or Power BI or whatever it is, that type of stuff will end up coming in through us. And the folks that report to me will spend half their time doing basically repro of that. So it comes into there's a layer of automation, then there's a case manager. And if it looks like a good case, the case manager will case it and connect it to us and the engineering team. We'll do the repro and we'll look at it. Yep, this is a bug. And then we'll do the severity assessment, like this is low, moderate, important, critical, whatever it may be. And depending on that, we basically only track from an MSRC perspective, important and critical. The low and moderates get tracked by the engineering teams, but we don't track them in quite the same way because they don't meet our essentially our bug bar, because we get, quite a few things that we do assess. And yeah, that's the whole process. And then the other half of the time they spend, looking at research, security research, novel mitigations. When you think of things, I don't know if you've heard of things like ASLR and DEP and all that kind of stuff that came out for Windows on the platform side. So that's kind of like my sister team. They deal more with the memory corruptions and all that. They were, creating mitigations for many years, and we're doing the same thing on the cloud side. So.
Yeah, that's a couple of acronyms I hadn't thought about in a while.
Yeah.
ASLR. Address, space, layout randomization.
Right.
DEP. I can't remember what DEP is off the top of my head, though. Like
data execution prevention, I think.
Oh, that's the thing. That's where you use the processor to control
pages,
protect memory, basically,
executable or non-executable. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So that's those are flashback to my time. Also working at big tech. So I've had a similar path to you, just in a different order. I did my big tech stint early in my career, which led to the startup world. So let's catch us up on just bug bounty program in general at Microsoft, because I've certainly heard about Microsoft's bug bounty program and what was happening in the early days with MSRC, but this is going back 10, 15 years ago. Give us an updated view of how this thing works and how researchers interact with it, and just take us through that if you would.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big program, not big in terms of what Microsoft does for security. So when you think about, threat modeling and SDLC and AppSec and red teaming and CI/CD, and, Microsoft spends a fortune on trying to make sure that software is secure as we know how. But there's that, after the release, kind of after pen test and all that on the SDLC, you would have bug bounty as kind of like a final operational sort of like for anything else that's fallen through the cracks. We want our partners all around the world to help us identify those things that they might notice that our security teams, for whatever reasons, didn't notify. And but in terms of that, it's the largest privately run bug bounty program. So we don't run it through like BugCrowd or anything like that. We run it ourselves at Microsoft, and we pay out around $15 million a year in bug bounties. And some of the bug bounties are substantial. So there's people that make a living, bug bounty hunting, and some do it Probably many do it on the side, in conjunction with whatever else they do. But there's definitely people that are full-time bug bounty hunters. And it's a thing. And it's really super great that they're, willing to submit to our program. We're happy to pay them for that, because a lot of times, obviously, those are interesting things that somehow slip through the rest of, the processes to secure software. So that's kind of like the quick overview of the program.
From just to kind of look at bug bounty maybe a little bit closer as far as how it's working in the modern perspective. So with Microsoft's program, how many total researchers do you have that are interacting with the program? Like, how does it stack up against some of the other, and there's some other big bug bounty efforts that are happening in our industry? Like, do you have 1,000 researchers, 10,000 researchers? Like, what's the scale of this thing?
Oh, I was just going to look it up. Actually, we're giving a talk at GERCON where I've got like more specifics on our program as far as like how many different countries and researchers are involved. I have all that data. I don't have it up. Let me see if I can pull up my other laptop here in a second. But it's quite a way. It's quite a lot. Long story short, we're going to be talking about our program and specifically some of the different bugs that we see on the online services side, like one in particular that's a gnarly bug that everybody's dealing with. All the cloud security and every online thing is SSRF. We could maybe talk about that later too, but that's definitely one of the bugs that's kind of concerning. And so, we'll be mentioning that. Let me see. How many researchers are in our program? We have, of course, it won't come up at the moment. 345 researchers were awarded in the past year. 1,200 eligible vulnerability reports. Largest reward was $200K over 17 different bounty programs. So interesting thing about Microsoft's bug bounty program is it's not like, hey, just pen test anywhere you want in Microsoft, and then if you find something, send it to us. That's not exactly the scope, which the scope is basically kind of like what you're asked to do and legally allowed to do, almost like a pen test scope or something. Some companies do have that kind of a more totally open bug bounty, where Microsoft more runs specific programs. So you have different one for Office and Windows and Azure and different pieces, of the thing, so that it's kind of a way to channel the forces of researchers to the areas that we feel like are most critical, and they each kind of have their own little nuance as far as what type of submissions. And you can go read on. That's what I would suggest actually to bug bounty hunters that are interested in Microsoft's program is just Google for like MSRC bug bounty or Microsoft bug bounty or something. You'll find our page. It shows what the different programs are, what the different payouts for different severities within different programs are, and how to write a good report, because that's kind of like one of the keys that we see that sometimes researchers maybe goof is that, a lot of them are maybe English isn't their first language, or they're young and it's their first time submitting or whatever. And so they submit kind of a report that maybe isn't super high quality. And that makes it harder to understand what they're trying to say and reproduce the bug and see if there's really something there that we want to, obviously are interested and want to take care of the bug, but it can be hard if the data is not presented well.
So what, you're describing a bug bounty program for a company that is highly mature when it comes to security. And just a side note for our audience, now that you've got some perspective on what Jared's describing about where Microsoft is today, we did an episode with Steve Lipner years ago where we went all the way back to pre-trustworthy computing memo, and he told us the story. He brought kind of the before story and then how they went through that. You're kind of describing 20 years in the future after that event, and they're 25 years now, 2003. Yeah, 20 years, I guess. You're describing kind of the future event, but is bug bounty like where do you have to be on the maturity scale for a bug bounty to be useful? Like, can some company that's brand new and they got nothing from a security perspective, like when is the right time for bug bounty to play out in a company's life cycle?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it could vary a lot because I suppose there's no reason why a startup or any other company couldn't offer some sort of rudimentary bug bounty type, program or something. But in general, I would agree. If you haven't done the fundamental, especially if you're an older company and you've got a lot of legacy and you haven't even done your first pen test or you're in some disastrous situation, I don't think starting with bug bounty would be the best place. I think more of a security engineering, roundtable or walkthrough or, those different kind of like 101. There's actually a lot of like different like cyber 101 type stuff you can go and find on the internet and look up and kind of like what are the first moving principles for companies to consider, NIST or whatever it is. And that would be a good place to start, I think, rather than starting with a bug bounty.
So you mentioned a moment ago SSRF, and I'm sure there's some other vulnerabilities, but what are some maybe key ones or types for cloud and online services that you've seen?
Yeah, so at GERCON, we're actually going to present our top 5. So it'd be cross-site. This is of important and critical, not considering like low and moderate, but of the ones that we get that meet the bar. XSS, we get a fair number of those. Those don't tend to be critical. They tend to be more kind of in the moderate or important category and something that we definitely address. So it's not, even though it's like the highest by volume type of vulnerability we get, it's not necessarily the most like severe that we get, I would say. And then CSRF or SSRF, it tends to be more serious because, rather than kind of, running code that's kind of more based on a phishing attack or something like that you might get with an XSS. With SSRF, if there's some kind of interesting bug in a service that would allow an attacker to then touch some kind of back end of the cloud or something that they really shouldn't even know is there or ever be able to get to, that's definitely worse from a criticality standpoint. So that tends to be something that we're currently pushing hard to address. A couple other things that come to mind in terms of vulns that we see a lot are, and it's funny how terms change over the years. I don't know, you probably heard auth-in and auth-c, but it used to just be called authentication and authorization. But now we have to like shorten and acronym everything. So auth-in and auth-c type bugs, which, that might be anything from, missing authentication on an API endpoint to maybe a role that's over permission. If you have like guest access in a tenant, for example, that shouldn't be able to do anything, but you can see everybody's files that they've shared, which is, that something like that would be a nightmare. Things like that would be like auth-c. And so it's, as you said, Chris, we're in a world that's now so much more mature, especially at a big mature company like Microsoft compared to 25 years ago or whatever. But we're also, like every other organization on the planet, rolling out platforms and, the amount of technology and cloud and AI and everything else that's coming out at such a large and rapid scale that it kind of like, and the importance of cyber. I mean, 25 years ago, there was like, Code Red and whatever and all these different kinds of like Blaster and all this stuff. But it was like, in some cases, it was like people screwing around or like it hadn't become such a serious like, it wasn't the Russians like trying to disable the Ukraine's power grid or whatever's going on now. It's the amped up capabilities of cyber now is so much more key in terms of what we see in the world. Lastly, there was code injection, and I could talk more about different places where you might see that in the cloud and stuff, but those are our top 5 anyway.
Well, can you take us through an example of an SSRF, something in a real life example? I still feel like SSRF is the OWASP top 10 item that people just don't get. They don't understand it very well. Like, I mean, cross-site scripting, and SQL injection, these things have been around for so long. It's hard to find somebody, even in AppSec, that can't give you a good 3-sentence definition of either one of those. But SSRF, I still feel like people are not 100% there. And so I'd love to walk through an example of something that has been reported that you have triaged through, and let's see what SSRF looks like in real life.
Yeah, and There's probably a lot of reasons for that. For example, as a bug class matures, like we kind of started off by talking about, memory corruption and buffer overflows. And so there were generic mitigations like ASLR and DEP and many others that tried to address that bug class. Although an interesting thought, that I have is that basically you can never really fully address any significant bug class. Like some people will try to tell you that you can, just try to tell you that if you just go like, oh, XSS should never be there. It's a simple thing that developers should know about. They should just never put it in. And so just try harder. Like that we've not seen that work in 25 years for buffer overflow. Like they're still there. So unfortunately, the idea of like, can't we just do better isn't really a good strategy, because these things are significantly difficult. So I think we see that in every bug class, to your point. And so even with mature bug classes that are better understood, that have legitimate mitigations in place, like with XSS, you have CSP, the content security policies, which is a legitimate, mitigation that can work effectively against those if it's rolled out correctly and implemented everywhere and tested and, everything else. So I think to your point about SSRFs, one of the reasons it's maybe not as well understood, and actually it's true for the other ones I mentioned as well, because it's kind of trickier. Kind of hard. There's no like generic mitigation for that. Same thing with auth-C and auth-M. There's no like, hey, if you just put this framework in place, then you'll never goof, RBAC again or something like that. It's not quite that simple. Code injection, I would say we don't really get too much SQL injection in our stuff. So like that one is one that we pretty much whittled out. But there's other newer types of different kind of code injection. Like you think about different kinds of like run operations that can happen in GitHub, automations, and there's different like takes on that I think we're starting to see more of. So just to kind of round out the conversation of like why, certain things are harder to like address and understand and resolve. And then so to answer your specific question, I don't have an exact case in front of me that I would, could share at this moment, but you can imagine, some type of product and you just go to like, go to Azure and look at all the different products that are inside Azure. There's so many different products, right? And they all have an interface and they all have different capabilities to run some kind of service or code or VM or whatever it is, connect to something, display something, database something, AI something, you name it, right? And there's just a plethora of how this could all work. And so there's a lot of different technology and communications behind the hood to make that work. So sometimes a finder may identify what they think is an SSRF. And sometimes it's a little hard to tell if it is. So maybe it can like reach out to a third party site and they notice that by using burp or some other man in the middle proxy. They're like, oh, I have this, tool set up to catch that. And I can identify this ping coming back out. Or maybe a lot of them will try to show that they can do some kind of port scanning if they can change a parameter. So there's some kind of request you send in and they realize there's a URI in there, so they can change the URI to like, instead of whatever it's inherently set to something, they tweak it to be 127.0.0.1 or something. And they realize they can hit something internal to your network, which is really the problem that shouldn't be allowed to happen. Then they show that they can do a basic port scan and stuff. But I think, one of the things that we're going to encourage researchers to do when we give our talk at GERCON is to try to take that a little bit further and realize there's probably more you can do with that. There's probably some sensitive backend server you could actually hit and force it to do something and leak a cookie or whatever it would be. And that would be a lot worse. So I think that part of it is why you said what you said. It hasn't been, for one thing, the test environment isn't as easily accessible. Like when you think about trying to create like a buffer overflow attack against like an Office file or something, where you have the whole operating system, so you can like open it up and WinDebug and look at the crash, and you can tweak all this stuff and figure out what's happening in memory, and you can kind of create your exploit like that. But with this, it's like you don't have the private part of the cloud to like play around with, and it really don't want researchers necessarily playing around with that private part. So there's an element that the like training and learning on the debugging environment is a little bit trickier to understand in some cases. And this is true of every CSP, cloud service provider.
So what do you think, like when you think about SSRF as a class, and this can be a panel, panel discussion portion of this. But Jared, give us your thoughts on this first. Like what's the overall solution? Like, do we need framework input validation libraries that are processing any URLs and are just removing these When you think about the paved roads and guardrails of what we provide for developers, like, what's your take on the solution to this, about this problem of SSRF specifically?
Yeah, that's something that we're going to cover as well. And there's a bunch of different options. Unfortunately, it's not a totally, just do this and everything's always perfect. But for example, you could either use whitelists or blacklists, and allow lists or deny lists. As far as there should never be a internal address in those parameters, for example, that would negate the internal port scanning. Unfortunately, maybe there's a service that has to touch internal resources. So then you can kind of whitelist to make sure it only touches a certain internal resource. You can also insert different types of headers that you could check for. And just kind of have a standard library that you use to do any of these type of calls that has some of that filtering already built in, and rather than forcing every product owner to try to roll their own crypto, so to speak. Yeah, this isn't crypto, but you know what I mean when I say that, kind of roll their own mitigations. They can use a centralized, secure version of a certain type of call. That's definitely one of the better. And then we've seen that in other fields too. We see that with the same thing again. If you go back to the analogy of memory corruption, use a safe version of string copy or something like that. Kind of the similar concept of a better safe API.
Yeah, sounds like a library would be the right place for some type of SSRF protection to proliferate. And when we think about the impact of libraries, even just with CSRF, I know you mentioned CSRF initially, but I really attribute the downward reporting and finding of CSRF problems. It is really the frameworks that have brought us along. I mean, CSRF used to be in the OWASP top 10. It's not gone. It's number 13 on the priority list. So people, I always look at it like, it's gone. Well, no, wait, it's not gone. It's just, it just didn't make the top 10 anymore. But that's an example of where a framework improvement caused a lowering in a particular bug class, because developers are using the easier framework provided options, which are preventing CSRF in the things that they build. I think SSRF, we could be with a lot of these bug classes that you're talking about. Not to your point, not off C or off N, because they're so unique. But with something like SSRF, it seems like a library framework component should be able to insulate us from this problem so that we can see it disappear in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really the goal. That's why I said the folks that report to me have two pieces. They have the intake, analysis of, casing work and kind of our, the cadence of what we do. And then we also have the proactive, variant hunting and fixed validation and mitigation work. And that's what we're trying to do, is basically come up with different types of, whether it's a library or some other type of broader mitigation that can try to, take care of these things at scale and the whole, rather than kind of whack-a-mole.
Are there any other case study examples for bug bounty that maybe you can think of that are not in that group?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's definitely all kinds of different bugs, that maybe didn't get mentioned in that top 5, kind of one-off bugs that come in through. There could be an Xbox Online thing, or there could be, some kind of mobile app thing, or there's all kinds of different. Microsoft's a huge company. That's one thing I realized when I started working here, is the amount of products and services is staggering, So yeah, there could be a lot of different types of bugs that come in, but those are definitely kind of, the ones that are kind of more prevalent, I would say.
Do you ever see, because there was an announcement, I think, yesterday about dropping Visual Studio for Mac, which I know that for a number of years they've been trying to get that to work. But any related to other systems like that? I know Mac, a few times I've been at Microsoft, you see more and more people that were running Macs as opposed to Windows machines. Anything like that in terms of Mac products?
Oh, I can't comment on that. I wish I could run a Mac, but I'm on a Surface. I miss my Mac. I shouldn't say that. I'm not allowed to say that, I don't think. But no, it's a thing. I do know for sure that obviously Office for Mac, any kind of, if there's a fix for a bug that happens to be, especially if it's for what we would call more of the on-prem solution. That's kind of the term for like what software used to be. Now, basically, most software has either like a cloud or an on-prem version of that same software. Then there would probably be a need to fix it for the client-side version of Mac, for example. And there's probably other examples of that client-side software that might run on a Mac. But in general, no, there's actually not a lot of Macs at Microsoft as far as running any key infrastructure. Even people using them too much, I haven't noticed a lot of that. But I'm sure there's some somewhere, especially if it's like some small company we just got bought that was a lot of security companies use Macs, so you probably see like pockets of little orgs maybe that do, but not as a corporate wide thrust for obvious reasons.
All right, well, we were going to talk a little bit more about history, but I feel like we've kind of covered some historical references throughout here, and so Robert, why don't you take us into the lightning round here with Dr.
Yeah,
Demott. Sure.
So lightning round is just 3 questions that we have been asking different folks who've been joining us. So the first one is, what's your most controversial opinion on application security, and why do you hold that view?
Well, I think it probably is a controversial view and kind of a hot take, I guess I would say, in the sense. But, you've been hearing preached to you for at least the 23 years I've been in cyber that there's this massive millions of jobs that go unfilled every year, and just an absolute, dumpster fire of staff shortage and all this kind of stuff. And I actually don't think that's true. I know more smart folks than ever that are looking for work right now that are having a hard time finding work, especially certain types of demographics and stuff. So I actually don't think there's a huge labor shortage in cyber right now, personally. I know that's a little bit of a hot take, but I think it's pretty balanced at the moment. There were companies actually laying off. Quite a few security companies cut staff over the last year. I don't think we see a lot of that. I think a lot of them are hiring again and kind of, making sure that they're appropriately leveled based on macroeconomics and things like that. But I think, I've seen more, especially sort of like folks our age, sort of what were senior level CISO type folks out of work, looking for work, having a hard time finding a role that they used to be in that they can't find anymore. Maybe looking at having to take like a, security engineer 1 type role because they can't find a comparable senior role anywhere. I'm sure they'll find something. Most people I know that looked long enough and hard enough did find something because there are still opportunities out there. But I don't think and universities are cranking out cyber graduates like crazy. There's a lot of small universities that realized that was a thing and they got on the bandwagon of doing cyber. So they're just cranking out all these graduates, which I think will largely fill the need. Now, I think sometimes companies say there's a shortage because they have a misunderstanding. They're like, I want to hire 30 SOC analysts for $6 an hour each and make them work midnight to 7 a.m. and they can't figure out why they can't find staff. Well, that's a different problem. That's not not an industry shortage problem. That's a hiring problem. Nobody's going to take that job, right? So, right. Anyway, I don't know if you would agree or disagree with my hot take, but that's a little bit of a hot take I have on that whole topic.
I mean, I'll comment on it a little bit just because, it seems like there's just, it's a hot news item. And I felt the same way for the last couple of years. It's, 750,000 people we're short 750,000 people. And then the next article is 2.2 million. And the next one's 200,000. Well, you guys, everybody just picking these numbers at random. What are you using to generate this number of jobs that are open? And, I think to your point, there's been a lot of improvements in the education process and attention and focus on cybersecurity degree programs. We're still not doing what we need to do from an AppSec perspective, but we are bringing more people. And I think it's really exciting. We're bringing a much more diverse range of people into our industry, which we needed that. We all knew that. We knew that 10 years ago, and we're starting to see some of the fruits of that labor happening now. And I would say there are still pockets in our industry where, for example, I play specifically in the AppSec space, and that's where I've played for the last 10, 12, 15 years or whatever. AppSec, I don't know anybody who's unemployed at the moment. Nobody in my circles is unemployed because There's still the opportunity to leave one job on a Friday and go to the new job on a Monday. But this is a very specific segment of our market. This isn't the SOC. This isn't GRC. This isn't audit. This isn't, any of those other pieces. This is a very unique part of the market. And over time, as we have more new grads and people that come in and enter this space, I think that'll change like the rest of the environment has. But I'm with you. I'm not sure where these numbers are coming from. I'd love to see somebody do an actual study that proves their data, that has data that we could then go trace the data and go, yeah, okay, all right, now we understand your number because we see where it's coming from.
Yeah, agree. So second question is, what would it say if you could display a single message on a billboard at the RSA or Black Hat conference?
I think for me, I mean, I love cyber. I've been in this field my whole career, and like everything about it, I'm passionate about and love it. But on the other hand, I also, just have a different take as far as what really matters in life, as far as faith and family and all that. So if I had the chance to put one message there, I would probably say something like, Jesus is coming. Are you ready? Or something like that, just to try to like recenter people's minds on what really matters in life.
Excellent. And number 3, what's your top book recommendation and why do you find it valuable?
Ooh, I have a little bit of a hot take on this too, which is I don't really, even though I've written a book in this field, I really don't read books too much in this field anymore and or advocate for the writing of them, because I feel like there's so much content that's so available. Like just jump on Pluralsight or LinkedIn Learning or whatever, like any class you want to take. If you want to learn how to reverse engineer, there's an 8-class track on Pluralsight you can watch over the next day and learn how to do that. Like it's so much more efficient and effective and impactful than reading a book that's like, I have all the old books, all the old, the white coding book that and the Chris Siegel's Ida Pro book, and I'll have all these books from 20 years ago that just sit on my shelf and collect dust because they're out of date in like a year. And so my hot take is that printed books are good, but probably not the best way to train, I guess. Unless you're just a reader and you love to read, I think there's still a place for them. I think there'll always be a place for. I actually do like to read, but not so much tech books. I prefer to read, other types of books, more leisure-wise or kind of broader, wisdom literature or something that's other than just like tech book. I think you can train faster with video content.
Yeah.
All right. Well, as we conclude our conversation here, Jared, what would you want to leave our audience with as far as a key takeaway, a call to action, perhaps a homework assignment that they're not going to do, but that's okay. I'm at least not going to report back to you on it. But like, what would you leave our audience with?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that we've been preaching in our field forever is probably still an important message for, business owners and companies and software makers to understand, which is kind of the whole idea of, I don't want to say shift left because that sounds like such a political statement as far as like that word's been used so much, but basically that, like make it an integral part of your development from day one. So all of the things from proactive design, and mitigating risk, they minimize costs, from not having as many bugs and as many fires down the road. And you just, it keeps you more compliant. And so all the things that are in the SDLC, like security training and code reviews and automating and CI/CD and, security champions, like I feel like on any level, whether a company is small or large, you can find a way to do that in a way that makes sense to you. So just being thoughtful about it and at least having, even if you're a tiny company with like 5 engineers, you can have one of the engineers spend half their time on making sure the design looks good and stuff like that. So that's kind of probably a message you've heard before and are tired of preaching. Because I think everybody in our field has mentioned that, if you're in AppSec at all. But I think it's still an important thing to help business leaders understand that, maybe in a more practical way too, maybe gathering data around it or something. Because I think sometimes business leaders now, they understand that, they've heard about it, they've heard about all the breaches and they're concerned about cyber, but they still don't really know like what's the appropriate level of investment? Like how do I get, people to really be excited about this and make sure that it's kind of part of our core ethos, around the product that we make.
Well, Jared, thanks for joining us on this episode, sharing your experiences and giving us an update on a view inside of Microsoft's security posture. Now, I thought that was fascinating just to get that update after hearing Steve Lipner tell us that story about how things started in the early days. It's great to hear how Microsoft has matured. And I mean, I kind of knew that already, but you just provided us with some additional details that helped us along the way. So thanks for sharing that insight with us. And it's great to finally get you as a guest on the Application Security Podcast.
Yeah, thanks. It's been too long. Appreciate it.